Citizen U presents UFO, where you find out.
We're the two teachers, and today you're going to find out about the executive office.
Andy, a lot of complex and confusing stories. We're here to make the complex simple and the confusing clear. Trump has won the presidency. Now what? He's got to actually govern. That's confusing.
Yeah, now you have to make it happen. Now, as you said, you have to implement policy. You have to enforce the law. You actually have to govern, and you do that through the bureaucracy and the staffing of the executive office of the president.
Clearly, being president is just part of the process. One man or one woman cannot run the multi-trillion-dollar government of the United States. For Donald Trump this week, he's got to start with filling up the executive office. The White House office, that group of 300 to 400, will be the arms, legs, ears, and eyes of this presidency. Who are these people?
Well, that's a good question. Seems kind of odd that we're asking that question now. And Trump is so different as being the first president elected who never had any political or military experience previously, when we could examine who was going to staff the White House staff and who was going to be in the cabinet. You could be self-assured that the political leader had a party mechanism to help him or her put that staff into place.
Well,
but not with Trump, because his company is relatively small. He likes a smaller staff giving him advice. But like you said, this is 3,000 to 4,000 appointees he has in the federal bureaucracy, plus an entire White House staff to make that operation move.
Well, Andy, that's why this will be so interesting and really quite a civics lesson, because the executive office of the president really gives us, the people, two things to look at. One, it allows us to look at what will the priorities be of this president. The person and people that he appoints in these various White House office positions will foreshadow what his priorities are. It also will reflect who's loyal to him. It will reflect who in the campaign did he value the most. And we've begun to see that already. By putting Reince Priebus as chief of staff, that looks to the priority of negotiating with Congress. Some of these other figures that we're seeing in the news, this shows who are the most important voices in the campaign. Let's not be too frightened by who these people are yet. They haven't done anything, but they do reflect his priorities, and they reflect the people that he trusts.
I think we should really pay attention to one area. If you're really concerned about the Trump administration, and that area I would suggest is picking is environmental regulation and the EPA. So we know that Trump has promised that he wants to cut back significantly on regulations, and we assume that some of those regulations are environmental regulations. But remember, he only appoints a fraction of the bureaucracy that actually implements and enforces environmental code. Most of those employees are permanent civil service employees. And we know from the political science on this, even if you have a president and an administration that wants big policy changes, it's very hard to guide those permanent employees in that direction. And so you might make appearances on the surface that look like big changes, but when it comes to actually implementing the policy, it's amazing. Even the most seasoned political experts have a hard time steering the bureaucracy in the direction they want. And like you said, when you have a lot of essentially political rookies, we only can guess what's going to happen.
Andy, the group that I want to look at is the Office of Management and Budget. The budget is ultimately what governments do. They collect and spend resources. The budget sets priorities. Trump's thrown out a lot of promises and a lot of ideas, from building the wall to repealing Obamacare to you know the list. Ultimately, it comes down to what's the budget allow him to do. And the director of the budget director will help him and guide him through what's possible, what's conceivable, and what can he get done. I'm going to be looking at the budget director. I do know this, that most presidents, when they start filling their White House office and their staff, after a few months, they'll say, boy, I want this done and that done, and very little gets done.
And remember that White House staff is not approved by the U.S. Senate. They're not confirmed like a cabinet member or deputy cabinet secretaries are, which really influences who a president puts in those different positions. A cabinet is typically going to be higher profile government officials who probably held elected office previously, possibly a Newt Gingrich, possibly a Rudy Giuliani, who might get Senate confirmation easier. But once they're in those cabinet positions, they are not necessarily entirely loyal to the president, no matter who that president is, because a cabinet secretary is giving advice to the president, but also is trying to protect his or her agency or department. A White House staff, on the other hand, typically comes from the president's election team. Trump is continuing that trend because he, like most presidents, want to surround themselves with staff who are permanently loyal to the president.
You want to know what a Trump presidency would look like? Don't just look at Donald Trump. Look at his White House staff. We're the two teachers. No fancy words.
No fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.